Hello and welcome to Reasoned UK, the channel that asks you to think more and follow less. I'm so excited about this one. So with the newfound popularity of millennium socialism, that means young people are as synonymous with nationalisation and trendy left-wing economics as the miners were in the 1970s. So should we kiss goodbye to our Pret coffees and our iPhones because we're on a one-way journey to a hard left future? And is there nothing you and I can do or say about it? Or are young people a lot more conservative than the media would have you believe? They are having less sex and consuming less alcohol and have a preference for hard work over hard drugs, as well as showing a preference for border controls and a pushback against gender equality arguments often made by the modern contemporary left. In America, the Pew Research Center found that only 25% of millennials in the United States could be described as consistently liberal, compared to 43% who were conservative. In fact, American millennials are far more conservative than their age were during the Reagan administration. And the brutal expansion of PC culture under the hard left's influence can really be felt from universities to the BBC to arts institutions. And much of the left-leaning bias is reported within the UK's education system, with the vast majority of both academics and students identifying with the left. I want to explore what this is like for those who are young and who identify as conservative. And after Boris Johnson's landslide win in December of last year, there have been various attempts to analyse that win and define conservatism for this new era. So at a time when that's up for grabs, with some calling for more state intervention and spending and others calling to get government out of the way altogether, what should conservatism mean to the next generation? Well, let's get some guests on and discuss all of those matters. Roll the tape. Joining me to discuss are three very talented young conservatives. We've got Emily Hewertson. Hello, Emily. Soutiam Goodarzi. Hello, Soutiam. And Muroki. Hello, Mercy. Now, I want to start by asking, we're going to go in with the hard stuff, why not? I want to start by asking, what's the worst reaction you've each had as a young conservative, to being a young conservative? I'll start in order. So I'll start with you, Mercy.
I mean, for me, it's interesting because not only am I by convention not supposed to be conservative because I'm a young female, but because I'm an ethnic minority as well. And I think the worst reaction that I've ever had from about me being conservative came after I'd gone to a Jacob Rees-Mogg event that was being held at my university. It was actually the week before he got assaulted at an event in Bristol, I think. Things were a bit heated up. There was a protest outside by the student wing of the Socialist Workers' Party. I think it was the society at my university. And event finished, went to the pub afterwards, and I'm at the bar and some random girl who I'd never met before came up and told me that I was a disgrace for being the only black person in the queue to see Jacob Rees-Mogg. And I was shocked because, I mean, it's such a brazen thing to say to somebody you don't know.
Mercy, you're a young mother as well. How much has that influenced your politics and actually your bravery in politics as well? Because you've wrote for the Times Red Box quite a lot and some really thoughtful, quite thought-provoking pieces as well. I wonder how, if your bravery and your politics in general has really been influenced further and shaped further by the fact that you are a young mother.
I do not want her to grow up in a society where she's told that because she happens to be a certain skin color, she has to conform to some, way of thinking at all. That's completely contrary to what I believe. I think she should be absolutely free to make up her own mind. And that's not to say if she does that, she can't go choose a different kind of ideological path to me, but I don't want to have that imposed on her by people from the left who think that they have a monopoly on what non-white people think. And I think it's important as well that we create these young role models, conservative role models, and ethnic minority conservative role models. And I think over the last few years we've been seeing a lot more of that, whether it's kind of in the media or on Twitter or just in the conservative benches themselves. We're definitely seeing more role models coming up, and I hope that's what my daughter will kind of see when she's older.
Beautifully put. Soutiam, could you give us some of your experiences, because you became a bit of a viral sensation?
It was, I think, the worst part I've actually experienced is within the education system, like within high school. The teachers' reactions were quite funny. I mean, I had teachers literally arguing with me after school until 5, trying to prove to me that the Conservative Party is led by white middle-class men. And I was just like, well, at the time, Theresa May led the Conservative Party, and I was like, well, I mean, that doesn't really flow. But I think I've had a few experiences, never as quite bad as Mercy's, I would say, but they weren't that bad.
Yeah. Emily?
Most days I get a death threat, for sure. I'd say one of the worst experiences I had was on a night out when someone actually decided that because I was a Tory, that they would throw a drink over me. So that was really fun. So at that point, that actually ruined my night. I had to go home, and I put on Twitter about it, and the reaction actually was that I deserved it.
We talk a lot, at Reasoned, we've been discussing the idea of there being a bravery deficit, and the idea that we've just recently celebrated VE Day, for example, when our grandparents, great-grandparents, whatever, went through some of the most brave acts that this country has ever been responsible for. But it strikes me that there are a lot of people out there who don't feel brave enough to say that they agree with us, for example, or they hold the same beliefs and values, which I think for the most part are quite common sense values that are shared by many in the country, apart from a very vocal minority, which is often found in academia, which is often found in the mainstream media, which is often found in all of these groups, which are given a much bigger platform than your ordinary punter out on the street. So I wonder, does the panel agree with that? Do you think that there are a hell of a lot more people out there that do agree with us, but perhaps they're all a little bit too scared because of all of the experiences that all of you have just mentioned right now?
You only have to look at the last election results to kind of get an idea of how many people there are that are willing to, subscribe to what the Conservative Party stands for. So when I hear, when you look at Twitter, it's really an echo chamber, and it's completely unrepresentative of the general population. And I think that was proven in the last general election. And the other thing is, I think a lot of it nowadays, especially with so many young people going to university, is happening at university. The kind of silencing or the intimidation kind of against being a conservative or having conservative views. And it reminds me of a story I was told. So I had a meeting with a professor from one of the big universities recently, a Russell Group University, and he said he was head of his politics course at the university, and he told me that a student had approached him asking whether he'd get marked down for arguing a pro-conservative views in his essays, and he told him of course not, but he disclosed to me that he wasn't actually sure, he couldn't guarantee that there wouldn't be professors in the department who would actually mark students down because they were expressing pro-conservative views. And I think in this case it was pro-Trump, pro-Republican views. So I think when young people are faced with that from people in authority, it's very difficult to challenge, and then it kind of ingrains this culture of kind of censorship of conservative views.
Yeah. Soutiam?
Well, actually, I have asked my teacher that question before, my politics teacher that question before. Obviously, we've got a different system, so it goes to actual examiners. So there is no way you know whether it's going to be marked down or not. And, probably maybe, we don't know. But I think that besides cowardice, I think a lot of people are quite conservative and don't know it yet. I think a lot of young people, especially in those circles, they've got conservative values, but they don't want to assign those values to conservatism because they view conservatism as some sort of nasty ideology that they've been told they should not believe in. So they just sort of align it with logic and common sense, when in reality it is conservatism and it is conservative belief. So I think from that, first, there are two things we need to do really is try and make people understand what conservative values are, and two, actually be a bit more brave ourselves, because we've kind of allowed the institutions to become more left-wing. We haven't, when institutions were sort of taking down conservative thinkers, say Roger Scruton as an example, in the media, we didn't really stand up to it as well as we should have. And I think that reflects badly on us and our cowardice and perhaps other areas. So I think we need to rethink our approach.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Tony Blair very much kind of emphasised the fact that we are a small c conservative nation in many ways. We just don't sort of realise that, and he used that in many ways to get to power. What I would say is, I think with the education system, it is ingrained with us from a young age what is the right party to vote for. I remember when I was in year 9, so I must have been about 14 or 15, and I was in a class which had nothing to do with politics, let's just say, and my teacher decided to show us a couple of the political party broadcasts. It was during the European elections in 2014, and they actually showed us the UKIP one and said, I cannot believe that this country has just voted for a racist party.
How would the panel describe or define actually what conservatism actually is? Because if we think about the Conservative Party's current offering, when Philip Hammond was still Chancellor of the Exchequer, I know no one wants to be reminded of those days, but the Conservative Party's offering for young people appeared to be a rail card, a young person's rail card, and it all seemed a bit half-arsed. So I think that I could split that into two parts. One, how would you define conservatism? But two, do you think young people need to be offered these half-arsed bribes like rail cards? Or do you think actually instead the Conservative Party should be focusing relentlessly on the cost of living, on cutting rents, on building houses, on those things which are obviously priorities for younger voters? Do you find that all a bit patronising or what? I'll start with you, Mercy.
I think what you point to is interesting in terms of what exactly are they offer. It's hard to identify what they offer, and it changes from leader to leader. And I think that's a good thing. And there's a quote on here that I thought would be really useful. I thought, how could I best explain conservatism to somebody who didn't know what it was about? And it's a quote by Michael Oakeshott, who's a philosopher, and he talks about how conservatism is not an ideology, but actually a disposition. The conservatism and the beauty of it is that it's adaptable. So I'm not advocating just being stuck in the past all the time and not hearing different values, different views, to see what is best for society, but it should always be about what's in society's interest and not what's in the interest of some tiny pressure group that shouts really loudly. So I think absolutely we should encourage people to be braver in defending conservative values, and I think unfortunately some identity politics does come into it, because when it's white men doing it and white men bringing very good points to the table, they're kind of accused of just being white men who don't know what they're talking about.
Exactly what Jeremy Corbyn did. He just thought, okay, which policies would young people vote for, and he just selected them. So I think that we do need to think long term, and we do need to think of what policies would be more effective long term and would be in the best interest of young people. And I think housing is definitely one of them, and it's not actually something that we're constantly debating it, but it's not something that we can reach an easy solution with because it's such a complicated topic. But I think we do need to put a bit more focus on that, actually.
Emily?
Yeah, so I'd say that the beauty about conservatism is that it's very adaptable and it's very broad church. So it can be applied to a lot of different things. To me, conservatism is about the individual being able to make better decisions for themselves than the state does. That's my personal perspective. But like I said, it's great that it is so adaptive and it can constantly adapt in order to survive. I think that is one of the beauties of conservatism. As for appealing to young people, I'm pretty much going to echo what's already been said. But I think the main thing that we really need to push is the idea of aspiration. I think that is a huge game changer. And I think the idea that you can own your own home is so important if we ever want to get young people on side. And I think another thing is that naturally, as people grow older, they do become more conservative in many ways. For example, I have a friend who's always been a Labour supporter, and the other day they got their first tax through, and they were actually moaning about it, which I thought was quite funny. But I think the idea that, you know, we do want to keep tax low so you have the freedom to make the own choices for yourself that are best for you is very important.
I mean, I'm going to throw out quite a controversial question, which will give you a flavour of my opinion if you don't follow me on the marvellous twitter.com. But do you think there needs to be a more robust defence of conservative ideas and values? And if you'll allow me to set out what I mean by that, I'm thinking of the swallowing of much of the arguments in favour of self-identification, for example, which would lead to the erosion of female-only, sex-segregated spaces, or the pursuit of net zero by 2050, which I think actually, one, is impossible, but two, politicians aren't being honest about the trade-offs required in that target. And three, I think by those who push for a larger state with higher taxes and a more activist intervention within the economy. I'll allow anyone to speak up and come in on that if you feel so motivated.
As soon as you start debating, for example, women's rights, you get called instantly a TERF. And I feel that that's a real theme within society today, that you can't have a debate without being called racist, without being called fascist, without being called homophobic. When you're none of those things, people just want you to be those things because it helps their argument. It's absolutely ridiculous. And for example, you mentioned things like the environment. I think there are some real sensible conservative solutions to climate change. Yet Extinction Rebellion have ruined the debate so much that as soon as you mention climate change, people just groan because their idea is so hysterical, their behaviour. And it's really frustrating as someone that does care about the environment that debate has been ruined. And I think in general there just needs to be a better debate. If you say you're proud of the nation, then surely that's a good thing. Patriotism is a good thing. It doesn't mean you're racist or whatever.
I personally do believe in transgender rights as well, but I think there needs to be a more in-depth discussion about gender-neutral toilets or transgender people taking part in sports. I think that sort of debate I think aspects of the left certainly don't want to take part in that sort of debate. And you know, as soon as you bring it up, you know, you're thrown.
But what do you think explains that? Why do you think they do want to just shut down the debate? They don't want to have it. Is it because they don't know the answer themselves, or what?
A lot of people think that a lot of people want to describe themselves as liberals because that's a sort of progressive sort of ideology. And I'm talking about British liberalism here as well. But in reality, liberalism is about free speech. But they think that if you put the idea of liberalism behind rather extreme ideas, if you describe it as liberal, you come across as more moderate. And essentially, it's just easier to use liberalism as a shield around your ideas to paint other people as fascists or extremists. And because that's been happening for so long without being tackled properly, I think it's just become the default position for not just people on the left all the time, but also some people on the right too. So I think it's more a toxicity within politics itself that we've sort of allowed to develop, rather than, you know, I can't believe, I don't have an answer to this, I'm just call that person a fascist.
Yes. Yeah. Mercy, you touched on this, but I wonder how do you think conservatives can challenge the left's hierarchy of victimhood that places, as you mentioned, way down at the bottom, white, straight males And what should conservatism's response be to the identity politics nonsense?
If it's to do with black people saying, well, you can't have a view on racism because you're white, it's all, I think it shuts down the debate, you know, so much, and it's actually counterproductive. And I'm not really sure what the answer is in terms of how conservatives can push against that narrative. So I am happy that there's a lot more ethnic minority and young female conservatives, etc., coming onto the scene, who kind of, you know, are able to push that aside and say this is ridiculous. And I think that helps more young people and more ethnic minorities say, actually, you know, identity politics is not really worth it. And, you know, so I think part of it is the visibility of other young people who push against it and other ethnic minorities who push against it. That is helping break down the whole kind of identity politics monopoly that the left have established.
We have a really powerful Home Secretary. She is of ethnic minority, but just because she doesn't suit the left's kind of agenda, she gets harassed, absolutely harassed. The drawing that was in, I believe it was The Guardian, of her was absolutely disgusting. If someone on the right dare do that, the abuse, the reaction would be absolutely shocking. And I think ultimately with identity politics, the proof is in the pudding that it just doesn't work. I mean, we saw in the last election that working class people overwhelmingly voted for Boris Johnson, a Conservative Party leader. So I think ultimately we are showing in election results that identity politics isn't working, and it actually benefits us in many ways that Labour haven't really caught on to that yet, and that they believe it does. And the more that they play that, they're never going to win.
What advice would you give to other young people who, you know, do share your views but just say, oh look, I'm not willing to be as vocal as you are because I'm really worried about what the repercussions of being so could be? I'll just let you all speak up on that.
I would say just be proud of your views, and although Twitter may make it seem that everyone loves Jeremy Corbyn and worship him like a god, actually Twitter is not real life, and I think this is such an important message. On the day of the election, I think the three top trends were hashtag Jeremy Corbyn for Prime Minister, hashtag Vote Labour, hashtag Labour landslide, and that just emphasises the fact that Twitter is not a reflection of real life. And also, the other thing I would point out is debate in person, I have found, tends to be a lot more sensible, a lot more kind of, I don't know what the word is, but it's just a lot more stable and sensible debates, whereas in person things get so heated. People say things that they would never dare say to you in person, and I've only ever had one bad reaction actually in person. A lot of people who don't disagree with me may come up to me, and we can actually have a really good quality debate. And I think that's important, that just remember that social media is not a reflection of real life in any way.
I think I would say, you know, join the party, get involved meet other like-minded people, because part of it is the feeling of isolation. If I come out and say this, am I going to lose? Will I even have friends? Kind of, will anybody support me? And I think joining the party, getting involved with other like-minded people, you know, coming to conference. Last year was my first conference. And, you know, I had a great time, and it was great being around that many conservatives personally. So I would just say, you know, just be proactive in kind of getting involved with other conservatives.
Soutiam, did you have any comments on that?
Well, I would just say that it's actually not as bad as you think it is. Sure, you might lose one or two friends, but do you really want to be friends with people who are so intolerant of different views anyway? But, you know, at college I've had so many Labour friends, and they weren't too bothered by me being conservative. We didn't really talk about politics all the time, so I think it's not as bad as one might make it in their heads when they're thinking about, oh my God, I'm going to come out as a conservative. It's not that bad. So just be brave, come out. It's okay. As
my mother would say, those who matter don't mind. Those who mind don't matter, which I think is a very important lesson for life. But right, I want to talk about this next question, just because I think it's a really interesting. I watched a video of Emily, and the BBC were asking Emily, just to put this into context, we're asking Emily whether or not they think her Instagram use and social media use in general will come back to bite her in the bum as far as her political ambition is concerned in the future. And I thought that was a really interesting topic for the panel, because as the first generation to grow up not really knowing life without the internet, do you think social media should determine the rest of someone's lives? Do you think someone should be cancelled for views on posts, etc., that they've made in the past? Emily, you seem like the obvious person to go to first on this.
Well, yes, I very much see, whatever happens in the future happens. Obviously, I'm careful about putting private information and things online like that. But in terms of posting bikini photos, which I think the BBC love to ask me about, I'm a young person. When I go on holiday, I like to strike a pose on the beach, and that's just something me and my friends do. And I think, body confidence is an important thing as well. In terms of, do I think people should be cancelled for views that they had years ago? I think as long as they recognise that those views weren't appropriate and, they apologise, etc., etc., I do think people can change their mind. For example, I think about 5 or 4 years ago, I tweeted that I really liked Katie Hopkins. And recently I tweeted that I didn't like her anymore. And a lot of people brought up the tweets that I tweeted when I was 14 or 15 years of age. And I was actually really surprised, because I thought, my opinions have changed drastically since then. And I was a 14-year-old person. I do not think that my life should be defined by something that I thought, 4 or 5 years ago when I was, I wasn't even an adult then. So I think there is a balance, obviously depending how bad it is, but we do live in a country which is free speech, and I think the best way to counter a divisive or a really racist or fascist opinion is to actually debate with that person and tell them why they're wrong, instead of just cancelling them completely.
Does the rest of the panel agree with that? I mean, I am deeply troubled by this move towards cancelling people for what I would consider to be pretty, for example, there was a virtual pride. I have no idea how that would work, and to be honest with you, I don't care to find out. But a virtual pride that was cancelled because one of the organisers had been liking pro-Brexit tweets. This sort of thing is utter lunacy. The country voted for Brexit, but because this organiser had been liking, I think it might have been Nigel Farage, that was what I picked up from the letter in which they announced the cancellation of this virtual pride. But I'm deeply troubled by this asphyxiating assault on free expression and speech, and I wonder if actually the panel thinks that that's going to get worse, not better, with future generations.
I think it's going to get better, because I think it's actually going to.
Is that because you think there's going to be a pushback?
I think there's going to be two things. One is there's going to be a pushback, hopefully, if we start to become more brave and don't let everyone just drown without helping them. But also, I think the right will eventually just say, you know what, if you're going to do this to me, I'm going to do this to you. And they're just going to get tired of it, because at the end of the day, there's literally going to be no one who's going to be able to stand as an MP if we start digging out every single opinion from when you were 2 years old. So I think people will end up having to drop it as a method of discrediting someone, because it's going to end up biting them. So that's yeah.
Mercy?
Yeah, I think to kind of take it full circle back to where we began and what we kind of said about conservatism being about adapting, looking at society as it is at any one point, taking it in, making your own kind of decisions about what seems right at the time. Because of that, if we're going to defend that kind of value, then we have to accept that people's opinions will change. In fact, we should encourage people's opinions changing over time. We should encourage people to take in new information and always be kind of looking at their own opinions and seeing if they still believe them and defending their own opinions. So I think if we're to accept that, then we have to accept that sometimes people held opinions that they no longer wish to hold in light of new evidence. And I think that it's honourable when somebody does come out and say, I held this opinion a long time ago, and I no longer hold it. And that's been the case with a lot of people who, for example, didn't used to support gay marriage, and other things. And I think that's just a feature of kind of critical thinking, to always be looking to make sure you say what you believe, and you believe in what you're saying at any one point. There's no point defending an opinion you had years ago just for the sake of not changing your opinion.
And if a human being was static and didn't change their views or have critical thinking that you've just mentioned, then I think they'd be severely lacking in their faculties. But also, I think that's a really good sign of a healthy, vibrant democracy, isn't it? Where they do change their opinion, they do form new views, they do hear new arguments, and that's something to be encouraged, not cancelled over.
I mean,
oh, sorry, who wanted to come in there?
Me.
Go ahead. No, that's all right.
I was saying the whole point of an election is changing people's minds anyway, especially with swing voters.
Yeah.
So, by saying people can't change their minds, you're literally defeating the point of an election.
Yeah.
Exactly, like the BNP was quite prevalent. I was watching the 2010 general election catch up because I'm that fun, and I was actually really shocked that BNP had a huge chance of winning a seat. I think they were actually almost favourites to win, and I remember that the leader of the BNP was on Question Time, and I think the best way to counter those views is actually debate, and I think as a society now, we now look back on the BNP and we don't think that they were the best person to win the seat, and that's all because we've had these debates and these discussions, and that's how everyone's opinions have changed.
Exactly. It was Nick Griffin. As soon as he had light exposed to him and his ideas had to be articulated, he clearly couldn't do it and was just ridiculed. But I wonder, I've got two more questions before we end. Does the panel think we've seen the end of the far left in this country as far as an election-winning platform is concerned, given that Corbynism was so roundly defeated? And should we be worried that students and professors who hold conservative sympathies are increasingly discreet? So if they happen to believe, for example, that free enterprise is the best way to defeat poverty, or that Brexit could be an advance for democracy, they would say it's best not to mention it. I'd get too much heartache or trouble if I do mention it. Do you think the hard left then, in that quite, I guess, scared and isolated set of opinions which are seen as being quite taboo, do you think the hard left will just grow again out of our generation? I'll let anyone come in on that.
I think the hard left, following the kind of leaked report that came out revealing that they'd been plotting against Jeremy Corbyn, and that's the real reason that Jeremy Corbyn lost the election, because the moderates were plotting against. I think that, if anything, will embolden them, because they'll be like, see, we could have won had it not been for those pesky moderates. So I don't think. Sometimes I feel like they'll always find a way to justify that they've been vindicated somehow, whether it's Corbyn saying they won the argument when they lost the biggest electoral defeat for about 90 years or whatever it is.
30s,
so I think it's very, very difficult for the hard to kind of shut down the really harmful elements of the hard left, because they will not stop at anything.
Soutiam?
I think they're always going to exist, really. I mean, I think all sort of belief systems will exist throughout a point of time, but I do think they're always going to exist. And to be honest, they have always existed. It's just been that with the likes of Tony Blair, they'd kind of been pushed back and forced to vote for the Labour Party, because they literally had no other party to vote for. So I think they always feel like they're under attack, and that's going to push them into the shadows, where they sort of, I don't know, I don't want to describe it like that, but they sort of grow, and then come back into the light and then lose an election again and just go back under. So I think it's going to be like that, and they'll always victimize themselves, and I think that's going to work in their favor.
Emily?
Yeah, I agree with Mercy. I think the far left in particular always seem to find an excuse for things. And instead of recognising where they went wrong and changing, they just continue and think one day we will have Jeremy Corbyn as leader. I honestly believe they still think he will be Prime Minister within the next 10 years. It is absolutely delusional. I think that's one good thing about the Tory party, that consistently we have recognised where we went wrong. For example, during the Tony Blair years, we were recognised as the nasty party. And so David Cameron really did recognise that, and we changed, we adapted. And I think the far left are so rigid in their views that they aren't even prepared to slightly change or recognise where they went wrong. So I think really, the devil works hard, but momentum will always work harder.
That's a good way of putting it. Right, to end then, I wonder if each of you could summarise what you'd like to see from the Conservative Party going forward, and what would make each of you proud to continue giving them your vote, and actually to have an election-winning platform that wins over the next generation. I'll go in opposite order now. I'll go with Emily first.
So I would say that the one thing that the Conservative Party do need to do for young people in particular is really emphasise ambition. We are the party of business startups, and I think that is so important, that there is the possibility that anyone from any background will succeed. I think the other thing we need to do is continue, and we've done so well on this, but to get rid of the image that we are real boring old men. We all know we're not, but I think the more young people and the more vibrancy that we put out, it just leaves the left with no other argument. So I think that's really important. And the last thing, I think we've started to do this, and we did it at the last general election, but it's to up our social media game. At the last election, it was so much better, but there were a few bits we fall short on, and obviously Corbyn continued to dominate it. But I think just the more, young faces and the more vibrancy and the more, we counter the stereotypical pigeon-shooting, port-loving Tory, the less the left have to kind of criticise us.
Yeah. Soutiam?
I think it will depend on what the issues of the future will be. I think, again, we're a party of pragmatism, so it depends on which issues are present. But I think housing is definitely one of them. We need to start definitely debating for more solutions, really, and just maybe consider the economy a bit more. I think we are going to be after the pandemic, we're going to be dealing with a wreckage, really, when it comes to the economy, and I think we're going to have to think of solutions which aren't very nanny states to start tackling the sort of recession that we're going to be facing, because I think it's going to be causing a lot of people to suffer, really.
Mercy?
Yeah, I think Soutiam is right. With the pandemic, it's really kind of thrown a spanner in the works, but it is a real opposite. Obviously, unemployment has skyrocketed. The full extent of this won't be clear for a long time, and it's really not going to be a good story. But I think the Conservatives have a real opportunity to show that they were serious about continuing with some of the agendas that they kind of spoke about in the last general election, like levelling up. This pandemic will most likely disproportionately hit the north, the poorer places, ethnic minority communities, and I think we have a real opportunity to show that we are intent on levelling up, especially now that it's more pressing with the pandemic, with the effects of the pandemic. And as Emily said, we need to up our game on things like social media, the things where Labour are really good at attracting young people. So there's going to be a lot of work to do, and I really don't envy the people who will be in charge of doing that.
Yeah, well, I think we can all agree on that. Anyway, thank you so much. Anyone watching this will come away believing that if all of you are representing the future of the Conservative Party, it will be a very bright future indeed. So cheers, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I'm sure you'll agree with me, that was an absolutely fantastic discussion and you'll be desperate to subscribe. So do consider hitting that subscribe button and the little notification bell to make sure that you don't miss out on any future content. Thank you very much. Reasoned is a grassroots organisation that relies on support from people like yourself who want us to continue producing our free-thinking, high-quality content. You can rest assured whatever you donate, big or small, will be put back into ensuring we win the battle of ideas. Thank you for your support.